Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the hushed luxury restaurant as a humble single dad guided his little girl to a table. Whispers rippled, he didn't belong here. But when a billionaire heiress locked eyes with him, her smile vanished, her entire body froze. The waiter sneered, ready to push him aside, until the father placed his arm around his daughter and said calmly with unshakable strength, "She's with me." In that moment, the entire room held its breath, because no one knew the history they shared or the secret about to unfold. Glittering chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors, while the low hum of crystal glasses clinking filled the air. The city's elite sat draped in silk and tailored suits, their laughter sharp, their words heavy with power. Waiters glided like shadows, pouring wine that cost more than most families made in a month. This was a place where reputations were measured in Rolexes, where no one entered unless they belonged. And then he walked in. A single dad, clothes pressed but plainly stitched, holding the small hand of his daughter. She clutched a ribbon-worn teddy bear against her chest, her eyes wide at the chandeliers, her shoes tapping gently on the marble as if afraid to disturb the silence. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. A ripple of whispers spread from table to table. "What's he doing here?" someone muttered. "Clearly a mistake," another scoffed. The waiters exchanged uneasy glances, their polished smiles slipping. To the rich, he was invisible, yet somehow glaringly out of place. And then it happened. At the far corner, a woman sat like she owned the room. Elegant, flawless, every movement rehearsed with the precision of someone born into wealth, the billionaire heiress. For her, silence was power. For her, people bent their heads before she even spoke. But as her eyes landed on him, the man and the little girl at his side, her mask cracked. The crystal flute trembled in her hand, her breath caught. She froze. In a room where status ruled every gesture, this reaction said more than words ever could. Something in her past was tied to him, something she'd never expected to confront beneath the glow of chandeliers and the gaze of hundreds. The waiter stepped forward, sneering, ready to dismiss the father and child. But before he could speak, the dad pulled his daughter close, steady and calm, his voice cutting through the silence. "She's with me." The words echoed, firm but gentle, rippling through the room like a challenge. Every head turned to the heiress, waiting for her response. Why did she freeze? What bound these two souls from worlds apart? And what secret was about to unravel in front of everyone? The morning light crept through the thin curtains of a modest apartment, painting soft streaks of gold on cracked walls. The place was small, 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen, but it was filled with something more precious than luxury: warmth. In the corner, a single dad moved quickly, balancing the rhythm of a man with little time but endless love. He wore the uniform of yesterday's shift, sleeves rolled up, still smelling faintly of coffee grounds and machine oil. On the table lay a brown paper bag, neatly folded, a simple lunch he had packed with care. A peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a note written in his uneven handwriting. "Remember, manners matter more than money. Be kind even when others are." Every day, he slipped a note like this into her bag, small reminders to shape her world with values stronger than wealth. From the bedroom, the sound of light footsteps echoed. His daughter, hair in soft tangles, padded out holding the ribbon-worn teddy bear she never let go of. Her smile was bright, though her eyes still carried the softness of sleep. She hopped onto a chair, swinging her legs as he poured milk into a chipped glass. "Daddy, why don't we ever go to the big restaurants like the kids at school talk about?" she asked, innocent curiosity shining in her voice. He paused, folding the sandwich with steady hands. "Because, sweetheart, the best meals are the ones we share together. Doesn't matter where." "But did Mommy ever go to those places?" she whispered. The question hung heavy. For a moment his jaw tightened, but he knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Your mom loved the simple things. She thought happiness was picnics in the park, not chandeliers in a room. That's how I remember her." His voice was gentle, but beneath it was a quiet ache, the wound of loss still fresh even after years of carrying it alone. Neighbors often watched them from their windows, the father walking his daughter to school each morning hand in hand. They admired his patience, his unwavering smile, the way he never raised his voice even after long shifts that left his shoulders sagging. Some whispered their pity. A man like him shouldn't have to carry so much alone. But others saw something different, a strength that didn't need attention, a quiet dignity born from struggle. At night, after she was asleep, he would sit by the small desk, bills spread out before him, calculating every cent. He never complained. Every sacrifice was a promise to her. She would grow up knowing love, not lack. He often told her as he tucked her in, "We may not have much, but we have each other, and that makes us richer than most." She believed him because when she laid her head against his chest, she felt it. The unshakable truth of a man who had nothing to give but everything that mattered. And though the world saw a struggling father, beneath the worn clothes and tired eyes was something no wealth could buy. Resilience waiting to be tested, dignity waiting to shine. The mansion stood like a fortress of glass and steel, perched on the city's hillside with a view that stretched endlessly across the skyline. From the outside, it shimmered with modern perfection, floor-to-ceiling windows, sculpted gardens trimmed by hired hands, fountains that danced in rhythm to hidden lights. Inside, staff moved with rehearsed efficiency, ensuring every corner sparkled, every need anticipated. Yet for all its grandeur, the space was drenched in silence. The kind of silence that echoed off marble floors and pressed against the heart like a weight. Here lived the billionaire heiress. To the world, she was untouchable, flawless hair, designer heels clicking across polished surfaces, a woman who commanded attention without ever raising her voice. Her mornings began with calendars filled by assistants, a blur of power lunches and back-to-back boardroom meetings. The rhythm of her life was dictated by stock prices, contracts, and the hard gaze of her father, a tycoon who had built an empire on control and appearances. He had raised her not with tenderness but with expectations. Success was her inheritance, image her armor. Weakness, he would say, is what destroys dynasties. So she had learned to never cry where anyone could see, to never hesitate when deals were at stake, and to never reveal how often the loneliness clawed at her once the doors of the mansion closed. At night, when the staff retired and the estate lay in stillness, she would stand before the massive glass walls, staring at the glowing city below. Thousands of windows lit with family dinners, laughter, and the kind of warmth her house never carried. She would peel off her jewelry, slip out of couture gowns, and let the silence settle around her like a punishment. Her closet was filled with garments most people only saw in magazines, her garage lined with cars polished daily, yet none of it softened the ache. She wore her perfection like a mask, a flawless smile for investors, sharp words for competitors, polite indifference for strangers. Inside, she was a woman haunted by the truth. All the wealth in the world could not buy the one thing she had never truly known, belonging. And though few remembered it, there was once a time when she had tasted something different. A time long before corporate boardrooms and golden cages. A night when she had stood on a lonely street corner, stripped of her pride, drenched in tears, and a stranger had offered her kindness without asking anything in return. That stranger was not from her world. He had nothing, yet in that moment he gave her something priceless, a reminder that humanity could still live in humility. She buried that memory beneath years of ambition, convincing herself it was a weakness to hold on to. But fate had its own plans. The day she would stand frozen in a luxury restaurant, staring into the eyes of that same man, she would realize the past she buried had been waiting to resurface. The restaurant was the kind of place most people only saw in magazines. White tablecloths stretched like canvases, silverware polished until it gleamed, and chandeliers dripping crystals that cast fractured light across the room. For the single dad, just stepping through the door was an act of quiet courage. His little girl clutched his hand, her eyes wide with wonder, and in her other arm she held her faithful teddy bear. Tonight was special. He had been saving tips for months, small bills folded into a jar on top of the fridge, so he could bring her here just once to experience what her classmates bragged about. Not because he wanted her to feel rich, but because he wanted her to know she belonged anywhere her heart carried her. But the room did not welcome them. A waiter at the podium raised an eyebrow at their clothes, clean, pressed, but plain compared to the jewels and designer gowns around them. "Do you have a reservation?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Yes," the father replied calmly, giving his name. The waiter scanned the list with exaggerated slowness. A couple at the entrance whispered behind manicured hands. Another man smirked, adjusting his cufflinks as though their presence offended the luxury of the place. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, the waiter led them toward a small table tucked near the corner, as if hiding them might preserve the restaurant's prestige. The little girl glanced around, her excitement dimming under the weight of curious stares. Her father squeezed her hand. "Chin up, sweetheart. Remember what we always say." "Manners matter more than money," she whispered back, nodding. But before their menus were even placed, the air shifted. The glass doors at the entrance opened, and a hush rippled through the room. A woman entered, commanding the attention of every eye present. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with a rhythm of authority. The billionaire heiress. Dressed in elegance, her posture regal, she carried the kind of presence that silenced rooms. Tonight, she was here for a high-profile business meeting, a deal worth millions hanging in the balance. Yet as she stepped into the golden glow of the chandeliers, her gaze swept the room and stopped cold. Her polished mask faltered, the color drained from her face. There, seated awkwardly in the corner, was the man she thought she'd never see again. The man who had once stood in the rain with nothing to offer her but kindness. The man she had buried in memory, hidden beneath years of image and power. Her hand trembled against the strap of her purse. She froze. The waiters noticed her pause, glancing curiously from her to the modest man. The diners followed her line of sight, puzzled by her reaction. The father, sensing the growing tension, gently pulled his daughter closer, his arm wrapping around her small shoulders. His expression remained steady, calm, protective. A waiter, eager to impress the heiress, stepped forward sharply, gesturing at the man and his daughter. "Apologies, ma'am. They shouldn't be in your way. I'll have them." Before he could finish, the father's voice cut through the air, strong, calm, and unshakable. "She's with me." The words carried farther than he intended, echoing across the restaurant. Forks paused in midair. Conversations stilled. Dozens of eyes turned to the heiress, waiting for her response. The heiress's throat tightened. She could have dismissed them, brushed them aside with a single cold command. But instead, she stood frozen, heart pounding with a memory no one in that room could see. Why would a man like him, humble, ordinary, speak to her with such certainty? Why would his presence shake her so deeply? And what secret bound them together, hidden beneath chandeliers and polished silver? In that suspended moment, the line between wealth and humility blurred, and everyone in the restaurant felt it. Something more than status was about to unfold, something that no fortune could silence. The moment hung in the restaurant like a held breath, but for the heiress, time had already spun backward. Her eyes stayed locked on the man at the corner table, and suddenly the chandeliers above blurred into the faint glow of a rainy streetlight. The clinking glasses and murmured conversations dissolved into the distant roar of passing cars and the patter of raindrops against pavement. She was back there again, years ago in a different world. It had been one of the worst nights of her life. She was only a college sophomore then, still wrapped in the shallow confidence of youth and privilege. She had been with the wrong crowd, so-called friends who smiled at her face but mocked her behind her back. That night, their cruelty had been laid bare. A party meant to celebrate her had turned into a spectacle at her expense. Jokes, laughter, whispered barbs about her not really fitting in, about her being nothing without her father's money. She had run from the room, mascara streaking her face, heels clutched in one hand, humiliation burning hot in her chest. By the time she reached the bus stop, she was drenched in rain. Her friends hadn't followed. No one had. She remembered the way she had collapsed onto the cold bench, wrapping her arms around herself, her body shuddering from sobs as much as from the storm. For the first time, the weight of loneliness had been unbearable. She wasn't the untouchable heiress then, just a broken girl no one wanted to sit beside. And then he appeared. Not in a suit, not in polished shoes, just a young man in worn jeans and a jacket that was too thin for the weather. He didn't hesitate when he saw her. Quietly, without judgment, he held out his umbrella. "You'll catch a cold like that," he said softly, his voice carrying no pity, only concern. She remembered blinking at him, confused. No one had ever offered her something so simple without expecting something in return. When she tried to refuse, ashamed of being seen in that state, he simply placed the umbrella beside her and walked a few steps toward the corner store. Minutes later, he returned with 2 steaming cups of tea. He pressed one into her trembling hands and sat down at the edge of the bench, not too close, not prying, but present. "You're worth more than what they see," he told her, his gaze steady, kind. The words broke her, not because they were grand or dramatic, but because they were true. In that moment, he saw her not as the heiress, not as the broken girl, but as a person who deserved dignity. They had sat in silence, sipping tea, while the rain poured around them. She wanted to thank him, to ask his name, but her pride and her fear of vulnerability got in the way. And when her driver finally arrived, summoned by a desperate call she'd made earlier, she slipped back into the armor of wealth, pretending she didn't care, pretending she would forget. But she hadn't. Not once in the years since had she forgotten that night. The memory had haunted her, his quiet voice, the way he shielded her with nothing but an umbrella and a few words that felt like salvation. And now here he was, no longer the young stranger at the bus stop, but a man, father to a little girl, his shoulders stronger, his presence even steadier. He stood in that restaurant unbothered by whispers, unshaken by stares. Her chest tightened. This was the man who had seen her when she was invisible, the man who had given her kindness when she had nothing to give in return. And as she watched him pull his daughter close and declare with calm certainty, "She's with me," she realized the truth. He had not changed. He was still the man who carried dignity without wealth, strength without cruelty. And she, despite everything she owned, was the one frozen, humbled by a past she could no longer ignore. The restaurant glowed with crystal chandeliers, their light glittering against marble floors polished to a sheen. At the center table, where the city's wealthiest gathered, the air was thick with murmured deals and subtle arrogance. The heiress sat with her business partners, men and women who draped themselves in silk and power, sipping wine as if it were proof of their superiority. Then the doors opened. The single dad entered, his daughter's small hand in his, her eyes wide with wonder at the gilded world she had never stepped into before. They moved carefully, almost shyly, toward the far edge of the room where a modest table had been set. For a moment, there was silence. Then the snickers began. "Who let him in here?" One of the partners whispered loudly enough for half the restaurant to hear. Another chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Must be lost. This isn't a diner on Main Street." Laughter rippled like poison through the group. The heiress froze, her fork clinking against her plate. Every cruel word hurled at him felt like a dagger aimed at her own chest. She saw his daughter's shoulders shrink, her little hands tightening around his arm as the weight of humiliation pressed down. Waiters hesitated nearby, uncertain but leaning toward the table as if to suggest, politely, that perhaps he didn't belong. The single dad noticed, of course. How could he not? Yet he did not flinch. Instead, he pulled out a chair for his daughter, his movements calm, deliberate, as though none of the whispers mattered. He smoothed her napkin onto her lap, smiled gently, and said, "Sit tall, sweetheart. Don't let anyone make you feel small." His voice carried just enough for those close by to hear, his tone steady with a dignity no money could buy. The daughter blinked at him, lips trembling. Then, with a slow breath, she lifted her chin just a little higher. The heiress's heart clenched. This man, mocked and dismissed, was teaching his child a lesson in strength that no boardroom or empire could ever replicate. The partners were relentless. "He doesn't even know which fork to use," one sneered. Another swirled his glass. "Charity cases should know their place." Their words dripped with contempt, feeding on each other's cruelty. The heiress sat trapped, every muscle at war with itself. Her corporate mask told her to laugh along, to pretend she didn't know him, to maintain the untouchable image she had built. But her heart, the part of her that remembered rain, a torn umbrella, and a stranger's kindness, screamed to rise. She leaned forward, catching the eye of a waiter who hovered too close to the father and daughter's table. Her lips barely moved, but her voice carried steel. "Don't touch them." The waiter hesitated, then nodded quickly, retreating. It was a small act, a whisper in a storm, but it felt monumental. She realized with a jolt of shame that here, in her world of glass and gold, she felt smaller than the man with nothing but courage. He sat there unshaken, while she drowned daily in the expectations of people who would never bleed for her, never comfort her, never hand her an umbrella in the rain. The laughter of her partners grew hollow in her ears. She looked at him, at the way he held his daughter's hand, steady and protective, and for the first time in a long while, she saw clearly. Wealth had built the room, but dignity had just claimed it. And it wasn't hers, it was his. The clinking of glasses and murmured conversations had already turned into a cruel orchestra of snickers and whispers. But suddenly, the smallest voice in the room rose above it all. The little girl, sitting on the edge of her chair, looked up at her father with wide, searching eyes. She tugged gently at his sleeve, her voice trembling but clear enough to reach across the crystal and marble silence. "Daddy, is it bad to be poor?" The words hit like a bell toll in the grand hall. Forks froze midair. Waiters stopped in their tracks. Even the business partners, so quick with their mockery, were stunned into silence. The sound of her innocence cut sharper than any insult they could have thrown. The single dad turned slowly to his daughter. He didn't care who watched. This moment belonged to her. He slid down from his chair, lowering himself until he was eye level with her, his broad frame bent humbly on one knee in the middle of that glittering restaurant. His hand rested gently on hers. "No, sweetheart," he said, his voice soft but steady, carrying into every corner of the room. "Poor is not about money. Poor is when you forget kindness, when you stop caring for others. That's when you're truly poor. And he smiled, brushing a stray hair from her face, "will never be poor in that way." The little girl blinked, absorbing every word, her tiny lips curling into a tentative smile. Her father's presence, solid, unwavering, was her shield against the cold eyes around them. But it wasn't just her who felt the weight of those words. Across the room, the heiress sat frozen, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had grown up surrounded by diamonds, private jets, and marble halls, yet her childhood had never echoed with such simple, powerful truth. Kindness is the real wealth. The lesson she had longed to hear from her own father but never received now hung in the air, spoken by the man she once knew and never forgot. Her throat tightened. She nearly broke then and there, fighting the sting in her eyes. To cry in front of her partners, in front of the world, was unthinkable. But her soul cracked open at the sight of a little girl being taught more about dignity in one sentence than she had been taught in a lifetime of privilege. Around them, the arrogance in the room faltered. No one laughed. No one sneered. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding each other's eyes. Others lowered their gazes in shame. The silence became heavy, sacred. The little girl wrapped her arms around her father's neck, her tiny voice whispering, "Then we're rich, Daddy." The heiress pressed her trembling hands against the edge of the table, the walls of her carefully built world beginning to crumble. For the first time, she didn't feel like the richest person in the room. The richest person was kneeling on the floor, holding his daughter, teaching her what wealth truly meant. The air inside the restaurant was so tense it could have snapped like glass. All eyes, once amused and mocking, now hovered between curiosity and shame. And at the center of it, the heiress sat motionless, her chest tight with a storm she could no longer contain. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, the endless lessons about power, status, control. Never bend, never show weakness. Wealth is your armor. But as she looked at the single dad kneeling on the marble floor, arms wrapped around his little girl, she realized that everything she had been taught felt hollow. Her hands trembled as she pushed her chair back. The scraping sound of polished wood against marble silenced even the whispers. Slowly, she stood, her elegant figure framed beneath the golden chandeliers. She took a breath that seemed to echo through her entire life, and with her voice unsteady but resolute, she spoke. "Tonight, this table belongs to him." The words rippled like thunder through the hall. Waiters froze, diners gawked. The business partners, eyes wide with outrage, leaned in with frantic whispers. "Are you serious?" one hissed. "You'll ruin your image," another muttered. "This will be in the papers tomorrow," a third warned. But she didn't care. For the first time, she wasn't speaking to protect an empire or a name, she was speaking from her heart. She gestured gracefully, her diamond bracelet catching the chandelier light. "Sir," she said, her voice softer now, "you and your daughter please sit here, at my table." The room gasped. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a declaration. The heiress had chosen sides, and she had chosen him. The single dad looked at her steadily. No awe, no deference, just the same calm strength he had carried from the moment he walked in. He placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder, meeting her wide, curious eyes. "This isn't about the table," he whispered to her. "It's about standing tall even when others try to push you down. Never bow to cruelty, sweetheart." The little girl nodded, her tiny hand gripping his firmly. Only then did he rise, his movements unhurried, unashamed. Together, father and daughter walked to the heiress's side. He didn't bow. He didn't thank her as if receiving a favor. He accepted because in that moment, he knew his daughter needed to see that dignity and kindness could coexist, even in the face of wealth and power. The heiress pulled out a chair for the little girl herself, ignoring the scandalized gasps from her colleagues. She smiled gently as the child climbed onto the seat, setting her teddy bear beside the crystal glass. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. The richest people in the room no longer seemed so grand, and the heiress, who had always been a prisoner of status, felt, for the first time, free. The glow of the chandeliers had shifted, softer now, as if the room itself had exhaled. Conversations in the restaurant resumed in hushed tones, but all attention still lingered at the heiress's table. For the first time, the heiress didn't notice the gazes of the crowd, nor did she care. Her world had shrunk to three people: the man who once offered her kindness, the child beside him, and the silence of everything she had left unsaid. She drew in a slow breath, her manicured fingers tracing the rim of her untouched glass. Her voice, when it came, wasn't polished like a boardroom presentation. It wavered with the weight of something long buried. "I never forgot that night," she whispered. The single dad looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. He didn't need to ask which night. Her eyes already told the story. She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "College. I thought I had everything, friends, money, my family's name. But when it all turned against me, when they left me crying in the rain like I was nothing, you were the only one who stopped. You gave me your umbrella, bought me tea you probably couldn't afford, and told me," her voice cracked, "that I was worth more than what they saw. I should have thanked you years ago." Her confession hung in the air, fragile yet heavy. The dad leaned back slightly, his gaze steady, calm as ever. "You don't need to thank me. Sometimes the smallest kindness is just what a person needs to survive the night." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm glad it mattered." His daughter, listening intently, tilted her head toward the heiress. "Do you have kids too?" she asked innocently, her voice bright against the dim hush of the restaurant. The heiress blinked rapidly, caught off guard. "No," she said softly, the word carrying a loneliness she rarely admitted even to herself. For once, she didn't cover it with a smile or a polished excuse. The truth stood bare in front of them. The little girl's brow furrowed. "That's sad. You'd be a really nice mommy." The heiress pressed her lips together, holding back the sting in her chest. Her eyes flickered to the father, who gave his daughter a gentle look but didn't scold her. Instead, he spoke softly, as though to both of them. Parenthood isn't just about having children. It's about love, about showing up every day, no matter how hard it gets. That's what makes a family. The heiress felt the words cut into her carefully built armor. For years, her life had been scheduled meetings, acquisitions, headlines. Yet in this moment, she realized what she had always been missing. Someone who showed up, who cared not because of power or duty, but because of love. She leaned closer, her voice raw. "You make it sound so simple, but it isn't, is it? Surviving, raising her on your own." The dad's eyes softened, though his shoulders carried the invisible weight of years. "No, it isn't simple. Some nights I wonder if I'm enough. Some days the world looks at us like we don't belong. But when she smiles at me, when she knows she's safe, I remember. That's all the wealth I need." The heiress lowered her gaze, swallowing the ache that threatened to spill. She had sat in countless negotiations, fought for billions, but never had she felt so powerless, and yet so moved. This man had nothing the world admired, yet everything her soul had craved. The daughter reached across the table, placing her tiny hand on the heiress'. The heiress froze, her eyes stinging as the child smiled. "Now you're not alone either." And in that small, innocent gesture, years of loneliness cracked open. No contracts signed, no fortunes traded, just the fragile beginnings of something new. Not romance, not fairy tales, but respect, healing, and the first steps toward a different kind of family the world could never measure. Beneath the glitter of chandeliers and the weight of wealth, one truth stood unshaken. Power without compassion is emptiness. Dignity cannot be purchased. It is lived, moment by moment, in the way we treat those who have nothing to offer us but their humanity. The richest tables mean nothing if they lack love. As the night faded, the single dad walked home with his daughter, her small hand tucked safely into his, the glow of streetlights wrapping them in quiet warmth. Behind him, the heiress lingered at the window, tears softening her flawless mask, smiling at a lesson she could never forget. Wealth fades, titles crumble, but kindness lasts forever. So treat every stranger with care, for you never know whose strength could teach the world what money never can. If this story moved you, share it. Someone needs the reminder tonight.